In his book, Three to Get Married, Archbishop Fulton Sheen insisted, quote, "Every objection against devotion to Mary grows in the soil of an imperfect belief in the Son," close quote. Alexandra DeSanctis on one Catholic's devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, now. My name is Todd Warner, and this is the Evangelization Culture Podcast from Word on Fire. Alexandra DeSanctis is a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center and a contributor to National Review. She writes and speaks regularly on a number of topics, including politics, culture, and the pro-life movement. She is co-author with Ryan T. Anderson of the 2022 book, Tearing Us Apart: How Abortion Harms Everything and Solves Nothing. She and her husband live in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Alexandra, welcome.
Great to be with you. Thanks so much for having me.
Segment 1. Meet Alexandra DeSanctis. In an essay, The True and Mighty Handmaid's Tale, published in our Sunday Visitor, Alexandra DeSanctis writes, quote, "When I was in middle school and high school, we were blessed to have daily Mass every morning at school. The chaplain who said Mass for us every day, Father Ron Gillis, had a line about Our Lady that he would often share in his homilies, and it has remained with me all these years later. Sometimes we think of Mary as if she's an icicle, he would say. We think of her like this frozen statue, stuck with her hands folded, just praying all day long. But Father Ron would always follow this remark about Mary as an icicle with a passionate shout." So Alexandra, let's lead off with asking, what exactly would Father Ron shout?
He would always follow that comment with, "It's not true." And there was, kind of some pounding almost on the podium up there. And it was good. Not that I was sleeping during Mass, but if folks were zoning out a bit, it would bring you right back. He would say, "It's not true. She's not an icicle. Mary is not an icicle. This is wrong. We think of her with her hands folded like she's a statue in heaven, just kind of stuck there. And this isn't who she is."
So we're going to dive deep into kind of Mary and the Catholic faith and your personal encounter with Mary, so to speak. But before we move into that, let's just talk a little bit about you and your upbringing in the Catholic faith. So how would you, Alexandra, describe your parents' faith, and how did that faith and that upbringing impact you?
Well, both my parents were cradle Catholics themselves, and they raised me Catholic. I was, baptized at 3 months old on the feast of St. Joseph, the Solemnity of St. Joseph. And I, went to Catholic grade school for a bit, but ended up being homeschooled actually until middle school. And a very big part of what we did, there's a lot of, running and playing outside and things that homeschooled kids get to indulge in. But a lot of what we did was really rigorous catechetical study, right? Learning what our Catholic faith is in an age-appropriate way was a huge part of what my mother taught us. And so it was certainly, Sunday Mass every week with both my parents. But my younger brother and I would go to daily Mass with my mom almost every day as kids. And it was just part of the life of our family. And their faith was very, very present to us. I think the fact that being Catholic is more than just sort of believing a set of principles and showing up at church every Sunday. It orders our life, and that really continued throughout my entire life, particularly in my ongoing education as I ended up going off to real school. But that's really stayed with me till today.
Tell me a little bit. Do you have a sense about what made your parents decide to homeschool? I mean, was that a foregone conclusion from your understanding they were going to be homeschooling you until middle school or high school, or was it something they tried the traditional route and it went a little sideways and they said, this isn't the way, we want to go this way? What's your sense about the inception of the idea to homeschool you to begin with?
I think if you asked my mom, she would probably say she would have thought of herself as the last person to be homeschooling. It's really not in her nature to be a teacher. I think she did a great job with what she has going for her. But I don't think that was ever her plan or something my parents had really thought about until they put me in school. And I would just say they weren't exactly thrilled with it. It wasn't anything egregious. I mean, it was a standard Catholic school. So,
right.
Nothing horrific, but just I think they had a sense that my mom had the bandwidth and the time. She was, blessed to be a stay-at-home mom, and she had the bandwidth. And they felt like with the sort of homeschooling community where we lived in Connecticut, she could kind of put together a really good social life balance for us, some really good, solid Catholic families there, and there were really solid curriculums available to help her give us a really solid education, better than what we could have gotten there. And when we ended up moving was when we transitioned into a Catholic school that my parents were pretty happy with later on.
You know, it's amazing to me. So I'm a Catholic convert. I was a product of public schools my entire life. My kids have gone to a parish school for their K through 6, and then now at a Catholic, middle high school, so to speak. And along the way, I've met so many people who've been homeschooled or who are homeschooling their kids, and I'm just astounded, first of all, by the quality of education that people like you receive from your mother and from the communities that surround your mom in terms of the homeschooling networks and so on. And secondly, just the robustness of not just academic abilities in all these other areas, but just the fact that the Catholic faith has been woven so deeply throughout the, as you say, the order of the day or the order of the ideas, the other fields in which you're studying. So just to have the infusion of Catholicism throughout all of education, it kind of seems in many respects the way it always ought to have been. And I think so many people have gone through those homeschool experiences like you have just greatly benefited from it. So I think it's, and you look back, it sounds like you look back at that as a very fond time of your life as well. Is that fair to say?
I really do. And I think a big part of it is because, I guess it depends on the kid, but for me, I don't think I would have really enjoyed the sitting at a desk all day model of school at that age. I really liked being able to sort of get my work done at my own pace, not have to go at the pace of everyone around me, whether that means going a little bit slower on some things or faster on others. And then the rest of the day, we got to go to the library or go to children's museums or an art museum or go outside and play or, watch a Disney movie or, whatever the case may be. Yeah. Things that you wouldn't be doing if you're at school and you don't compromise on the education. You, in some respects, probably learn more and better things depending on the alternatives. But I really do look back on it fondly. I read so much, so widely, and got to play so much and just sort of let the imagination run freely. And I have a very strong sense I want my kids to have that too. I don't know if it would be in the form of homeschooling or a sort of co-op or who knows down the road. That's a long time from now to make that sort of decision. But that was really formative for me to have that kind of time.
Was the transition when did you start Catholic school, on-site Catholic school in 9th grade or was it 7th grade? When did you make that transition?
It was in 7th grade.
Was that for you? Was it difficult or was it like, I'm not difficult in terms of the rigor, because it sounds like the rigor was not an issue. Was it difficult in terms of the transitioning from the style at home to the style of what was being offered or even the material being offered in the Catholic school? Or would you say, no, it was actually pretty seamless where we went?
It was difficult in the sense that we spent a lot of time driving to and from school. So that was, in addition to the extra time that you're spending actually in the school building, just, hours straight was not something I was used to at all. And then, homework, of course, is a big one. Just coming home from school and there's no, in addition to being in the car, you then have to spend more time studying. So that was a big transition. I would say homeschooling did prepare me well academically in most subjects. Math was a little questionable, but that was probably my own weakness in that subject more than the homeschooling.
Sure.
But the social element too was a big transition just because there's more kids around all the time, and it was an all girls school, so we don't need to get into all that. But that can be a different dynamic.
Yeah.
So there were definitely challenges, but I do think I was prepared well on the whole.
Would you forgive me? You don't have to tell me what school it was, but is this New York or where did you grow up?
So when I was homeschooled, we were living in a small town in Connecticut, and then we moved to Virginia outside the DC area.
Gotcha. Okay. Where do you live now, if you don't mind me asking? What general locale?
So we live in Fredericksburg, which is about an hour south of DC. It's not so much a suburb of DC, really. It's kind of its own city.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's reflect on Catholic education as a whole. What's your sense about the impact of a Catholic education? You can't compare it in yourself because you never had a non-Catholic education. But how do you think the Catholic aspect of your education has impacted your life as a whole?
Well, it's an interesting question, particularly now, because part of why we moved here last summer was my husband is now working at a classical school in the Catholic tradition here in Fredericksburg. And so a lot of what I'm learning is, the classical education model in particular is really a beautiful thing for children. And I wish my education had been even more along those lines than it was. But a big tenet at this particular school, and I think of any classical school that's also Catholic, is the idea that our education is oriented towards universal truth. And that's something you speak about on this podcast a lot, that there's this one truth that everything else we learn, whether it's science or math or art, all of it is directing us towards towards God and towards our ultimate end in heaven. And I think even though my education wasn't strictly speaking classical, that theme was present in everything that I learned, that the truth that I'm learning here in literature class is leading me towards a higher truth, or the whatever we're exploring or studying here is leading us towards a higher truth. And I think that's really, that principle has guided me throughout my work too, and in my post-education life.
Do you have a sense, and that you're giving that up already as you're saying this, do you have a sense that the Catholic education is ever more indispensable now in light of the fact that we're living in a much more coarse, if not irreligious age?
Well, I think it's absolutely essential. And I do think there's schools, I'm familiar with plenty of schools that aren't strictly speaking Catholic, including some classical schools or Christian classical schools that I'm sure I would be comfortable sending my kids to, or that are probably a great education too. But if you're Catholic, whether you have your kids at home or in a school, I think learning from an early age sort of the comprehensiveness and the coherence of the Catholic tradition is really important, because when you get out in the real world, you shouldn't just be saying, well, I think this because my parents do, or I go to Mass on Sunday because I'm supposed to. That kind of faith or that understanding of who you are as a human being, it doesn't get you very far. It doesn't teach you how to live. Right. But if you're educated in a way where you've internalized these truths mean something for every aspect of my life, and I can give an account of that, and I know I've chosen to live that way, I think that's really the fruit of that type of education.
Let's expand beyond the education then. Let's talk about your Catholic practice of prayer, the sacraments, the corporal works of mercy. How do those, Alexandra, how have those informed your daily life?
I would say probably daily Mass is a big one, and it hasn't always been an everyday kind of thing for me my entire life, but it's been a big theme of my practice of the spiritual life, probably because of, like I mentioned, us going as kids with my mom. We were homeschooled. We had the time to do it. Yeah. And then the school I went to, daily Mass was actually worked into the schedule of every school day. So you could go every single day after the first 2 classes. We had Mass. And then when I went off to college, I went to the University of Notre Dame. And I like to joke when I talk to parents who are concerned about sending their kids there, which is fair for a number of reasons. But I always say it's almost harder not to go to daily Mass than it is to go to daily Mass, because there's so many opportunities on campus. Every dorm has its own chapel. There's the basilica right there. Most of the academic buildings have chapels with daily Masses. So you really just kind of stumble into it all the time. And so I went to daily Mass there as well. So that would be a big part of it, just that encounter of choosing to be there when you don't have to, so to speak, right? It really shapes you. And knowing that something is happening here that's worth being part of, even if God doesn't say, please sit in the pew today. I think that can be very formative. And other than that, I'd say just different devotions, different saints in particular have come to me at different times in life. And it's interesting, we're talking about Mary today. We can get into this more, but around the time that I gave that talk last summer that turned into the article we're talking about, I would say that was the time that Mary really kind of became very real to me, because she had to, because I was giving a talk on it. And it was a big shift for me that has helped my spiritual life a lot.
We're definitely going to talk more, and I want to hear more about your perspectives on Mary, also on the saints. And again, I want to commend everybody. I want to say it again throughout this: The True and Mighty Handmaid's Tale, from Our Sunday Visitor, a wonderful essay that Alexandra offered. Alexandra, before we move to our next segment, you've been an eloquent and impassioned staff writer for the National Review, and also a fellow for the Ethics and Public Policy Center, where you write on culture and family issues. How have you been able to keep your faith informing and centering you in a world that's kind of intent on drawing people into what can be a little bit of the idolatry of politics? And National Review weighs in appropriately on as is its calling on the state of the practice of politics, and we're called to be in the public square and so on. Obviously, there's just a way to kind of get drawn further away from faith and further into the intoxication, or like I said, idolatry of politics. How has your faith anchored you so that doesn't be the case in the work that you do?
That's such an interesting question. I could probably say quite a lot about that, but the first thing that comes to mind is my faith has always given me, we talked a bit about that eternal perspective, and that our lives are oriented towards heaven and eternity and what we were created for. We weren't created for the next 4 years of who's going to be president, right? And I think my work certainly is predicated on the idea that politics matters, that advocating truth matters, speaking up for what's right matters, and it's not worthless to do these things just because we're all hoping to go to heaven someday. Right. But at the same time, I think our politics has really become inundated with this idea across the political spectrum, no matter your ideology, with the idea that, this is the be all end all. And what happens in this election, or what happens even in my kids' public school, is just the catastrophe, end of the world type of thing. And it's just not, right? We have to keep that eternal perspective of, we do our best here and now, but we're going somewhere else. And, winning this election, so to speak, is not the ultimate victory, and losing is not the ultimate loss. We're just doing our best to live our Catholic values in this country. And politics is important for that, but it's not, we can't lose our souls and our peace over it.
Segment 2, The Depths of the Blessed Virgin. In her essay, The True and Mighty Handmaid's Tale, Alexandra DeSanctis quotes Carol Houselander, who says this, quote, "Each saint has his special work, one person's work, but Our Lady has to include in her vocation, in her life's work, the essential thing that was to be hidden in every other vocation, in every life. She is not only human, she is humanity. The one thing that she did and does is the one thing that we all have to do, namely to bear Christ into the world," close quote. So Alexandra, first, could you say a few words? You mentioned in our previous segment, you mentioned the saints in general. Say a few words about the intercessory roles that saints play in your life.
Well, I think different saints have always found me at different times. And I think a lot of people have experiences like that, where you might not really be super familiar with one of them, but they just sort of start following you almost, or appearing in different places as you read, or even, the local parish where you move happens to be a certain name saint or whatever. And that's always been my experience. On occasion, I've gone hunting down a particular saint because they're a patron of something that's important to me, like St. Francis de Sales, for example. And they sort of stay with me for a longer time. But others, they just sort of crop up, even something like picking a saint of the year, and just getting to know a different saint and having more of a relationship with them. I would say the first time anything like that happened for me was with St. Therese, and I picked her as my confirmation saint, like probably many young women my age.
Sure.
Mainly because my dad had a very present devotion to her, and it was something that he would mention from time to time, and so it just kind of stuck with me. And so she's been one who's been with me through my whole life. But other than that, I like when they crop up, and they always end up kind of teaching me something about whatever season I'm in, or showing me something that wasn't quite clear before, and it becomes clearer through learning about their life.
Do you have a sense as to the origin of your father's devotion to St. Therese?
I don't know that I do. I really should. It's probably back in the recesses of my memory somewhere.
Sure.
Yeah. I just remember he would mention her, and his name's Joseph. So St. Joseph is the other big one for him and for our family, and certainly for my marriage now too, for a number of reasons. But I guess I'd better go back and inquire about that.
I love the way you said that, though. I love the notion you said that the saints start following you. And I'm telling you, again, as a guy who came from the Protestant fold, who really said, the saints have interesting stories, and that's kind of where it ends, move into the Catholic fold, and really find myself profoundly accompanied by saints, their intercessions, and just having this wonderful communion with the saints. And that obviously will lead us ultimately to our communion with Mary. What an extraordinary opportunity to be kind of sort of enfolded in this vast family of the favorites of God. So but I love the notion of the active saint following you. I was going to say kind of the stalking saint, which we like them stalking us for the right reasons, and that's fantastic. So let's talk about Mary. Mary's story. So Mary's story begins with her fiat, her utterance in response to the archangel Gabriel. "Let it be done to me according to your word." Alexander, what is the ascent of this young woman to usher in the central event of the universe? What does that ascent mean to you? Well,
I think that the biggest thing that I take away from that, it's a momentous concept, right? I mean, the idea that God chose this particular way of coming into the world, I think, is what really sticks with me about it. Of course, Mary's choice to be obedient to it is essential, but the fact that he chose this way of giving her the free choice. Yeah. Now, of course, there's complicated theology here that I'm not really licensed to dive into.
Right.
But the nub of it, right, is that we can freely choose to love God. Mary is demonstrating to us that God doesn't want an army of robots who are forced to do what he wants, because that's not love. And so she's demonstrating the ultimate yes to that free choice the ultimate act of love, to assent to being part of God's plan, or the great theodrama, as Bishop Barron puts it. That is what God's calling us to, and not in as grand of a way as he called her, but he's inviting us into a relationship of love, not a sort of forced coercion of do what I say now or else.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think it's not just this era, but even looking back to the 20th century and even further back to the French Revolution and just all of time, there's been so many ideological movements out there that are effectively secular faiths that are not, they lack, among many things, they lack that they lack truth. That's the first and foremost thing they lack, but they also lack the fact that they invite you to assent as opposed to compel you. The majority of these ideological movements out there are they're compelling, they're compulsion oriented, and there's punishment for not being compelled. I think the interesting thing is a certain anti-religious perspectives nowadays might be like, well, this you're kind of this theocratic world that's going to force people to do X, Y, and Z because that's the will of the church and so on and so forth. And as I came from the outside to the inside, I was amazed at how much this is all. There's a truth. And there are consequences associated with the truth, but there's an invitation to embrace the truth. And as you've just mentioned, in one of the greatest invitations in the history of the world, the Annunciation, and the greatest assents to that invitation being Mary's yes. What an extraordinary commentary in that microcosm of God's relationship with man, God's relationship with Mary, about this loving relationship that allows room for the freedom of yes or no, but the hope for the yes, because that's where the truth resides. Is that a fair characterization?
Absolutely. And I think it brings to mind, Mary as the new Eve, and we know where free will got us the first time. And if you look around every day and wonder why everything is so gosh darn difficult, welcome to, a fallen world because of original sin. And so if you're kind of angry with Adam and Eve for getting us into this pickle, it's kind of healing to look at Mary and see, well, there it is done right. That she also was created with free will, and God gave us a chance in his, divine plan to try again. And she enabled all of us to have redemption through her. So, and through Jesus.
So St. John Paul II reminds us that, quote, freedom consists not in doing what we like, but in having the right to do what we ought. So what does Mary's fiat, in your eyes, what does it teach the world about freedom to be virtuous versus freedom to do what we like?
Well, there is quite a lot to say, particularly if you spend a lot of time on politics or looking at the news these days about our sort of perversion of the concept of freedom. We've, for a long time now in America, thought of freedom as license, or just the ability to do whatever we want to do as long as it doesn't sort of, harm other people, is how you would put it. Although in many cases, we do think of freedom as being able to harm other people. We just don't. We might reframe it for ourselves so it doesn't look like that's what's happening. But we don't have this idea that there's a right and wrong thing to do even anymore. We don't have an idea that morality ought to order our public sphere, or if we do, it's a rather twisted vision of morality. And so I think what Mary shows us is that we do have free will, and God does give us the ability to choose the wrong thing, but we don't. When we choose the right thing, that's where joy and happiness lie. That's what this real definition of freedom means. Not that we'll always be super thrilled and entertained and getting everything that we want if we follow his will, but rather that that's where we're flourishing in union with him. That's the path that we have to take to get there.
Going back to your homeschooling days or Catholic school days, you start thinking about that anything that you really wanted to sort of become good at or arrive at a place of satisfaction with, it required sacrifice. If you want to be a good student, you got to put the time in. You want to play the violin, you've got to start the hard act of practicing. Same thing with exercising and playing sports and so on and so forth, that there's an incredible amount of sacrifice. One of the things I'm actually interviewing Patrick Deneen about his books, the Why Liberalism Failed and Regime Change. And one of the things in that book he mentions about pre-modern liberalism and modern liberalism is the notion of pre-modern liberalism was there's the notion of there's brokenness inside of me as a person, and as such, I need to restrain my appetites. I need to manage my desires. I need to tap into effectively the true, the good, and the beautiful. And in that self restraint, I arrive at the freedom of virtue. That's the pre-modern notion. And what Patrick Deneen argues is that the modern version of liberalism, larger liberalism, not Democrat, so on, but even though that may apply, modern liberalism is more about the notion of I want to be free to do what I want. There's not a restraint. It's just it's almost, you go from the virtuous freedom to the libertine kind of freedom. And to your point, it seems that we live in an age that just libertine freedom seems to be the definition of the day.
Very much so. And I think we're sort of witnessing almost a secular reversion to the idea that order is something we might need or want. There's this whole genre of books about productivity and habits and, how to do really good work, or how to focus, how to order your day, or even something as simple as, I think it's in Jordan Peterson's book about the 12 steps or whatever that's called, where he talks about making your bed or cleaning your room. Just these very basic things where we do see people kind of grasping at, I need something more than just getting out of the bed and doing whatever I feel like all day, right? That's not actually the way to a fulfilling life or a productive life I can be proud of. But unfortunately, people don't have kind of the moral imagination or the moral schema and framework that we were blessed to receive. And so they're kind of grasping around and looking for these secular answers or kind of ways to organize their time in life that are good, probably, a good place to start, but not enough.
It's funny you say that. I really appreciate that, because I structure and order are not the enemy. I'll sometimes say to my patients, if they're kind of dealing with depression, I say, look, if you spend the next week, getting up in the morning and showering and shaving and getting dressed and wearing clothes that have a waistline and you're dressed nicely and you go out and engage with people and you work hard and then you exercise at the end of the day, you might be a little bit more tired, but you're going to be fulfilled. As opposed to if you spend the next week in your sweatpants, watching Netflix, not getting off the couch very much, and just dusting the Cheetos off of your shirt every so often. I mean, there's just one might say, oh, this is pleasure, and then this one is work, and it's like, yeah, but at the end of the day, I think we all crave the guardrails of structure and order, so we can at least arrive at our destination, as opposed to driving into the ditches of, again, Cheetos on my shirt and feeling kind of gross and depressed. So I appreciate your advocacy for the renaissance of structure and order.
Yeah, and I really think it's something that people crave, right? I don't think most people would enjoy by the third day of binge watching Netflix. They're not having fun anymore. There's such a thing as too much pleasure, too much of a good thing. If you would concede that watching Netflix is a good thing, I mean, there's definitely too much of it. And we've all felt it in different ways that we kind of zone out or try to rest in the wrong ways. I think it's a struggle even for those of us who might have a concept of true leisure, right? It's not always easy to get that right. But
Right. So in her book, The Anti-Mary Exposed, Carrie Gress writes, quote, "Mary's purity allows the essence of God to shine through her," close quote. So Alexandra, in an age of ego and self-interest, how can we become better at uttering the self-emptying yes to the will of God?
Oh, wow. That's a very big question. I mean, I think that the biggest thing that I've learned, and maybe this is, simple and obvious to listeners, but the biggest thing I've learned on this topic through my own spiritual life and trying to reconcile it with just living as a person in the world is God's will is not some kind of secret hidden thing, right? I used to have this conception of God has this plan for my life kind of on a poster board hidden behind a curtain. And it's my job to sort of pray hard enough or look for the right signs to piece together what the big secret is and make sure I don't mess up or things are going to go really poorly. And I had a spiritual director with whom I was sharing some of this. And he basically said, look, this is not what God wants. For, as long as you're living or striving to live a good, holy, virtuous life, you're practicing prayer, you have some sort of, semblance of a spiritual life you're trying to keep together. You're, participating in the sacraments, and you genuinely want to pursue God's will for you, he will bring good out of it. And so you have to choose and act and trust that he's going to be bringing good out of the choices that you make. And this was really freeing, because I think for a certain stripe of Catholic, we have this sense of discernment, kind of like that poster board, right? Like there's some secret message out there that we could miss if we aren't trying hard enough or listening hard enough or whatever. And to know that as long as you're not choosing between immoral things or contemplating doing something, really awful, God likes human freedom. He loves human freedom, and saying yes to his will doesn't look like, trying to figure out the big secret. It looks like praying and being attuned to his voice and then acting. And Father Gregory Pine's book on prudence, I found really helpful in shaping my thinking on discernment and acting prudently, because it's not like there's some big secret that you can figure out if you pray the right, novena. That's not really how it works.
Yeah, that's actually really well said, and I love that notion of basically kind of engaging with prayer, engaging with the sacraments, and opening oneself up to the God's the movement of God in your life. It's funny because before we came on the air, you just kind of had made mention, and I'm not divulging anything that I think would mind me divulging, that finding yourself where you are seems providential. There wasn't like this master kind of plan at a young age, if I may say so, of here's up on the bulletin board the photos and the yarn and the thumbtacks of the different ways I arrived to this place, and yet here you are. And so it sounds like to further reinforce kind of your surrender to God, but your openness to God. You feel like it sounds like the hand of God has kind of helped to move things and to move you in such a way as to arrive at a place where you feel like you belong. Is that okay to say that?
Yeah, that's definitely what I've learned. And it's certainly not because I'm so perfect at this sort of relinquishing myself to God's will kind of thing. I'm much more of the, put the big blueprint on the wall and try to make sure I'm controlling every step so nothing goes wrong kind of person. And I've learned, I haven't made it through much of life yet, but through what I've done, I've learned that the best things in life that have happened to me have been surprises. They haven't been, some of the things are things I might have hoped for, like, getting to work for National Review right out of college. That was always a dream of mine, and it happened, but I didn't show up on day one saying, 5 years from now, I'd like to be writing a book about, the future of the pro-life movement that will come out 4 days after the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade. I mean, how do you script that, right?
Yeah,
that was not because of me. And so I think just kind of an openness to the desires that God places on your heart, the gifts that he gives you, the people he brings into your life. And this is something that marriage has really helped me learn too, just trying to plan together and figure out our next steps as a family in a number of ways. We've just kind of learned God opens doors at the right time, and you have to be open to them. You can't be thinking like, well, I'm on this path, and so I'm just going to stay here come hell or high water. But you also can't really force things. There's a way in which you meet people at the right time, and if your eyes are open and you're kind of listening, you kind of see where you're supposed to go, and you go there in faith if you can.
Do you think in your own life and also in the lives of many others, not that you're passing judgment, but I mean, do you think there's a lot of sleepwalking at times in your own life and sleepwalking, that many people are sleepwalking past sort of kind of, again, not looking for kind of God's clues in the bushes per se, but just kind of, kind of almost automatically falling into the self-assertion path of, I got this figured out, I'm good. And as such, sort of God kind of falls aside, kind of as a detail, as opposed to a motive force in kind of helping you to get kind of where you want to go. What's your sense about the sleepwalking self for yourself or for others?
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. I think this is very, very symptomatic, even of people who are, open to God's will and trying to do their best, because a lot of the times it's not super clear what God wants. He's not always, speaking freely, or really that there's times of a lot of quiet, and it's not super clear. And the best you can do is just sort of put one foot in front of the other right where you are. And that's hard enough. But this is maybe a silly image, but one that works for me is sometimes I'll think about my life like God's given me this sort of picture and I'm supposed to color in the lines, and you have to make sure you get it right. And, what if this isn't the right color here or there? But in reality, he's got this huge picture of your life that you can't even see, right? You think you're just doing this one thing and that's what he wants, but you could never possibly imagine, like sort of like the example I gave about the book, like you can never imagine really what he has in store. And part of our kind of discernment of moving further away from DC into Fredericksburg, we realized we were just kind of on autopilot when we first got married, and my husband was going to law school. He ended up leaving and taking a very different path that's been really fruitful for us, and we're much happier where we are now. But we never would have planned that had we just sort of been marching along on autopilot. We lived outside DC where I grew up and have a lot of friends and family there. We were just kind of doing that because that's what everyone was doing, and we hadn't thought about it very much. And so I think a lot of this is, how much are you really thinking about what you're doing and praying about what you're doing, and not in an obsessive way, but with an openness to, maybe just sort of doing what I'm doing because I'm doing it is not a good enough reason.
It's funny because I interviewed recently Father Stephen Gadbury about his life as a priest down in Arkansas. And one of the things he says is God has a plan and you have a plan, and your plan doesn't matter. and he's not trying to be hard, but he is trying to say, the problem isn't that we are overly passive or docile and just laying on the ground and saying, okay, God, if you want me to eat, put food in my mouth. We're not saying, and that's always being said, this terrible image to think of that. But at the same time, it's the notion that if anything, we overdrive, we don't underdrive, and we overdrive kind of the narrative of where we're going to go. And sometimes as sometimes miserable as it might seem, or frustrating as it might seem, or counterintuitive as it might seem, as a great thinker once said, faith means believing in advance what only makes sense in reverse. That you kind of believe that I got to believe right now. I don't know where this is all going. I'm open through the sacraments. I'm open through prayer. I'm open through a process of spiritual direction, discernment, etc. And then somewhere down the road, you look back and say, now this makes more sense. But it sure as heck didn't make sense at that time. Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, very much so. And I think it's a tension of, having to live well where you are and being content in the present moment and knowing, today's troubles are enough for today. And that's always been the hard part for me, right? We can't not plan anything for the future, but we also can't think that the entirety of our future can be known to us and be in our control. And sort of living in that tension has always been a big challenge for me. I kind of just want all the answers so I can make sure what I'm doing now is right. But doing what I need to do today can be right, even as I'm open to something very different tomorrow.
Yeah, very good. Last question in this segment, Alexandra. After Jesus was born and the Holy Family was visited by shepherds sharing their testimonies of angelic heralds, the Gospel of Luke records, and Mary kept all these things, reflecting on them in her heart. I want to ask you, how does the model of the prayerful, not the icicle, but the prayerful and pondering Mary, how does that model impact your life?
Well, I would say it's essential and probably something I should reflect on more than I do, because that's really not my way. My way is to get a clear idea of what I'm supposed to be doing and then charge ahead. Yeah. And but the times in my life, sort of like we've been talking about, where something I really didn't expect unfolded, it's always been because of that kind of spiritual experience of something just sort of pops into your head or your heart, and it just sort of stays there and you don't do anything about it. You don't immediately rush to act. You don't even necessarily think about it a lot, but the more you return to it, the more true and right it seems. And so one example would just be having met the man who's now my husband. It very much unfolded like that. People always say, oh, you know when you know, and that sounds so stupid. But in a sense, it was true. It just sort of felt right that he would be the one that I would marry. And it just sort of, as time went on, that unfolded and became truer and truer. And other big decisions I've made in my life, I think, have been the same way. And so I certainly wouldn't compare it to Mary pondering things in her heart, but I think it's something of the same spiritual idea that that openness and then that willingness to ponder the truth will sort of unfold in a beautiful way if we let it.
Hi, I'm Todd Warner, Managing Editor of Evangelization Culture, the journal of the Word on Fire Institute. Word on Fire is a global evangelical community that exists to provide our members with the resources they need to proclaim Christ to a secular culture. Our award-winning quarterly journal, Evangelization Culture, is offered exclusively to Word on Fire Institute members. It's a tangible representation of our mission and goal to lead with beauty in order to bring others to the knowledge of truth. Inside each issue, you'll find writing from premier scholars and inspiring pieces on literature, culture, and daily life from fellow missionaries on the journey to know and serve Christ. Get a copy of the current issue of the Evangelization Culture Journal for free by visiting wordonfire.org/journal. Thank you, and join us in bringing Christ to a hungry culture. Segment 3, The Misunderstood Mother. In her essay, The True and Mighty Handmaid's Tale, Alexandra DeSanctis writes, quote, "We might understand intellectually what it means that Mary intercedes for us. We know that we can ask for her assistance and venerate her without worshiping her. But many of us tend to see Our Lady as an optional add-on to our faith. Perhaps we let the image of her as a statue frozen in prayer get stuck in our minds. We feel she's too far removed from us and uninterested in our small concerns. Perhaps we think we should cut out the middleman and go straight to God, bypassing Mary along the way. Of course, it is proper and fitting to worship God and no one else, but we miss so much if we ignore his mother, close quote. So again, Alexandra, as a former Protestant myself, I used to believe that Catholics came perilously close to idolizing and worshiping Mary. So let me ask you very bluntly, for those who are maybe not Catholic listening to this podcast, or are Catholic, but they worry about the role of Mary. Do Catholics worship Mary? And what is the difference between veneration and worship?
No, so we certainly don't worship Mary. We worship God alone as our Savior and our Creator. Mary is not even, there's no comparison there. So there's no worshiping going on of Mary. But the veneration due to Mary is almost, well, I shouldn't compare it to the saints, because for the audience I'd be speaking to, there's also some concern about how we relate to the saints. But
sure.
Sort of a simple way I've heard it said is, if you might ask a friend to pray for you, our relationship to a saint or to Mary on kind of a higher level is very similar to that, where, but even more so, because we know and trust that these people are in heaven and can intercede for us in a very powerful and different way from a friend who lives down the street. And so it's really just a relationship of asking for support, asking for prayer, and with Mary in a particular way, because of her central role in allowing Christ to come into the world and be our Redeemer, our Savior. She's owed this special degree of veneration or respect that does not come close to worship in any way. And so it's really just a kind of relationship of trust and asking for that closeness to Christ that they have, right? Help me draw close to the Lord and to God in a way that you have and I have not yet.
It's so good. That was a big hurdle, that what you said was a hurdle that helped me, the notion that if we believe in the communion of saints, if we believe in the timelessness of souls in heaven, and then the time-bound souls on earth, that there's still a connection. The Catholic notion, as I have understood it and practiced it, has been that, as you said, just as I can ask my wife to pray for me, or just as I can ask my spiritual director to pray for me, or my child to pray for me, or likewise, they can all do the same of me for them. At the same time, I could ask the Saint Anthony, Saint Teresa of Lisieux, Saint Thomas More, Mary Untier of Knots, to pray on my behalf. There's no small number of saints whose names are invoked as I would drive my daughters to school. The saints that are patron saints of students, or patron saints of athletes, or patron saints of health, or sometimes there was a Saint Jude prayer, for whatever the cause, or a lost cause seemed to be. So it is and again, my understanding was, of course, these saints are going to Christ. They're going to God himself, and you could just bypass them and go straight there. But likewise, you could also bypass asking your spouse or your kids or your best friend or your spiritual director, and yet we still do that. We still ask. We have prayer intentions in the church for these things, because we all want to be in community with one another. So I think what you said is very apropos.
And maybe some people don't ask their friends for prayer, but I would say, how lonely is that, right? You could do it on your own. I suppose you could try to make your way to heaven without ever asking for prayer or praying for others or asking the saints for intercession. I'm sure it's possible. I'm not here to say you can't do it, but why would you want to? Right. If you have the opportunity to do it a different way, I think that's a much more pleasant way of going about it if you can.
Yeah, well said. Solidarity. So Alexandra, at the miracle at Cana, Mary intercedes with Jesus on behalf of the wedding party. To those she's helping, she points to Christ and says, "Do whatever he tells you." Now, again, this doesn't, for those who are skeptical about what Mary is being put up as by the Catholic Church as this kind of goddess or what have you, this very act, Mary the mother pointing towards Christ and saying, "Do whatever he tells you," doesn't strike me as the act of a mother trying to usurp her son's divine status. Would you agree with that?
No, not at all. And I've always thought of this sort of as a I don't know, almost a joking moment. I mean, I don't have the authority to interpret scripture properly, so who knows? But kind of it's not a do what I say now kind of thing. It's I know that you love me. I know that you love these people, and wouldn't it be so great if you could help them in this way? Yeah. Kind of like wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Yeah. Yeah. Why not just do it because you can, sort of thing. It's not...
we've all had our parents say this to us, and we're like, I understand. I get what you're saying, Mom.
And it's so humanizing of both of them. And I don't know, I think with a lot of gospel passages, especially when we've heard them so many times in church, we just sort of hear this rote, rigid, talk about a statue with hands folded, kind of, okay, and she's saying the same thing she said last time, and he's going to do it. Okay, great. But it's not, if you sort of put yourself there as one of the wedding guests, for example, and watch it unfolding, I don't think it's like some weird, rigid interaction. It's a mother and son who love each other, and seeing it in that light, I think sheds a lot of understanding on it.
I've never heard that before. I love that. The winking mother. And she mean the point is still stands about, it's not me that is going to help you in the way that he can help you. But it's like you said, it's a profoundly, it seems like a very natural engagement with mom and son. And he's like, oh, okay. But I like that. I like that. So Alexandra, Chesterton concluded that the Virgin Mary, quote, embodied as a complete human being all that the church has to say to humanity, close quote. And Benedict XVI once asserted, if Mary no longer finds a place in many theologies and ecclesiologies, the reason is obvious. They have reduced faith to an abstraction, and an abstraction does not need a mother. So would you agree? Don't we kind of need a loving human mother just as we need a divine heavenly father? What's your sense about that?
Well, I do think so. And it's not that we can't, go to Jesus or God as Father with the same things we would ask Mary for, but it's just a different type of relationship, in the same way that, if you have a particular relationship with a saint, say, for example, St. Anthony, who we would always ask for his intercession if we lose something, there's kind of a familiarity and closeness there of, okay, here I am again. Look, I lost my keys. Right, I do this all the time. Help me out. There's sort of a type of closeness there with a motherly figure that's just different, because we're embodied as either male or female, and that means something for our nature. And so the fact that Mary was a woman means something for our relationship to her and her maternal nature in particular. And that's something that's really unfolded for me in the wake of preparing this talk and this essay, that there really is a human maternal love available that's not being forced on us, versus that sort of icicle or statue notion of Mary as this kind of perfect person who never did anything wrong, is kind of looking down her nose at us at how, why can't you be as great as me? No, it's very much just pure love for us that is available. And if we want it, she can offer us so much in the way of drawing closer to her son.
It is an interesting thing. Many people have criticized the church for being very patriarchal, so to speak. And yet here in this patriarchal faith, front and center, obviously not at God's level or Christ's level, the Trinitarian level, there's Mary. There's this deep and profound veneration of a woman. I think it was Chesterton once again that said, at one point I'm told that the Catholic Church is wrong because it idolizes men and makes it a patriarchy, and then at the same time I'm told that it worships women. So which is it? And he explains all these different kind of tensions, that they do it that way, then they do it the opposite way. And he said there's something awfully intriguing about this strange creature that does everything wrong, and it does the opposites of those things that are wrong. So that notion of having her as a mother, as an intercessor, and the indispensability of that and the comfort of that is an extraordinary thing. Your essay discusses Mary as Theotokos, if I'm pronouncing it right, known as God bearer. How are we called to be God bearers today, would you say?
Well, I think a bit of it depends on just sort of where you are in the world, what your calling is. If you have a particular career, or if you're in the home, it changes a bit depending on who you're around all day and what you have the opportunity to say and do. But we are all, I think, in a universal way, the call is to bear Christ into the world the way that Mary did, not literally, but her ultimate witness. And I think you quoted the section from Carol Houselander saying that Mary has to encompass in her vocation that of every human being, or of every saint. It's all kind of under the umbrella of her witness. And that witness is bearing Christ into the world. And she did it in the very literal way. But for each of us, the call is the world really needs Christ. And this is something I love about Word on Fire and your podcast, that the world needs what we have to offer. And it doesn't need you or me personally, although we are called to do certain things ourselves. It needs the message of the gospel. And the first and foremost task of every Christian life is to think about how and in what ways can I today bring the message of Christ to the people that I'm around, or to the world through my career, or whatever it is. that's really what the world needs from us.
Let me ask you this, Alexandra. Have you been to, have you seen the Pietà in person in Rome by chance?
I have, yeah.
Again, you probably saw pictures of it before. So for those who are unfamiliar, Michelangelo's Pietà is this beautiful sculpture of Mary cradling Christ in her arms, and it's transfixing. When you first stood in front of it, we've been talking about the different facets of Mary, the Mary of the Annunciation, the Mary at the wedding of Cana, and now we find ourselves Mary, grieving mother. How were you moved when you sat in front of that work of art? When you considered the nature of Mary's suffering?
I mean, it's a just absolutely remarkable statue, and I would say the power of it is really it puts a fine point on it to think that you can really contemplate it and experience it, even though there's a trillion people milling around you as you're trying to look at it. It doesn't seem to matter somehow. Like, sure, it would be nice if it was just you, but you really can still. It's very, very powerful, even so. And I've always been kind of drawn, well, not always, but since around when I graduated from college, I found out about the seven sorrows of Mary and sort of the riff on the rosary that you can pray with the seven sorrows. And just the idea that saying yes to God's will and being, the most important human being that ever lived apart from Jesus is not some ticket to everything being wonderful. And in fact, quite the opposite. And that what that means for our own life as people who will necessarily suffer, even as we're trying to choose the right thing. It's not like you do the wrong thing and you suffer, and you do the right thing and everything's great. Yeah. It's this very kind of simplistic, rudimentary idea I think we all kind of have deep down, like, I'm a good person, why is this happening to me? Well, look at Mary, right? And she's not saying, well, kind of suck it up and be great like me because it didn't bother me. She's saying, no, look, I suffered too, and I'm willing to suffer with you.
That notion that's a extraordinary notion you just articulated. First of all, for me, Mary came to life when I had my first child. It was all of a sudden, if I would go to the Stations of the Cross or I'd look at the Pietà or whatever, I would all of a sudden see myself as a father cradling or encountering my son or my daughter. I have two daughters, but encountering my child during a passion, cradling their body in the wake of a horrific injustice, violent injustice, and it's piercing. It's absolutely piercing. And I think back to our original conversation about the priest who had said to you that she's not an icicle. The Pietà, even though she's captured in a moment, with her sorrowful head tipped forward and her arms, her oversized lap and her arms cradling this young adult man, God man, even though it's frozen in time, embodied in that moment is profound suffering, simultaneously twinned with a certain inner strength or grace, neither of which eclipses the other, so to speak. It's all kind of wrapped in one, in a turmoil, a storm of emotion, which again, it takes away, as you stood in front of, as you said, all these people milling about, and there you are, awestruck by what you saw.
Yeah, that's a great way to explain it, that tension there of sort of being, I hesitate to say being okay, but it almost is like she's okay, right? She has peace and trust there, even in the midst of, the worst moment of suffering in her life. Right. It's really a lesson to us, and to be able to see it kind of, like I said, not as a sort of shameful, here's how you do it, what's your problem kind of thing, but as a, both an example and an inspiration, but also as an invitation to accompaniment. Yeah. Segment 4, Life and the Mother of God. In her book, Tearing Us Apart, How Abortion Harms Everything and Solves Nothing, co-written with Ryan T. Anderson, Alexandra DeSanctis writes, quote, "Pregnancy for many women can be a burden, and for some it can entail grave physical costs. But that doesn't justify the intentional killing of another innocent person. And not just any innocent person, but the woman's child. Missing from bodily autonomy arguments for abortion is any recognition that a moral relationship between mother and child already exists by the time a woman is contemplating an abortion." Close quote. Wow. Alexandra, when you put that down,
about that moral relationship that exists. That just hit me right between the eyes. So thank you for writing this book, which I commend to people, Tearing Us Apart: How Abortion Harms Everything and Solves Nothing. I want to ask you to begin with, Alexandra, what are the origins of your passionate work on behalf of the unborn?
Well, this is another one that would go back to childhood. I don't really remember exactly when I first found out that abortion exists or anything about the pro-life cause, but I just kind of know I've always had this sense, since as long as I've known that this happened or this happens in our country, that I think each of us is really called to do something about it. And not everybody needs to dedicate their career to focusing on it, but everybody has a responsibility to know that this is happening, to realize that it's a grave evil, and to find ways in their own life to do something about it. And for me, it really began to look like something a lot bigger than that when I started my career after college. I didn't really go into it thinking I was going to write about abortion all the time or something, and that's kind of what ended up happening. But it's really because of the sort of Catholic values that we talked about being instilled in my home, and the fact that we have this understanding of what it means to be a human being, what we owe to one another, what we owe to ourselves, really informed by my Catholic faith. And this issue has always been important to my parents, and my dad in particular worked on Capitol Hill when I was pretty young on this issue for a U.S. senator. And so it's always just been very present in our home. And I think my work has been a natural unfolding of that upbringing.
Can you say, just this goes back to your career, but also your career as it relates to this particular devotion to this cause? How did you go from? Tell me a little bit about. So you're at Notre Dame. What are you majoring in? And then while you're there, what do you? So how do you find your way to National Review?
Well, I studied political science with a kind of focus on political theory and constitutional studies, and then I also studied theology. I had a minor in theology, and I worked for one of the campus newspapers there, the Irish Rover, which is the independent Catholic newspaper. And I've loved to write my entire life, even as a kid, and I've just always loved it, writing, editing. And so journalism seemed like a pretty good fit because I was interested in politics, and it seemed like a good place to kind of put my talents together with the topics that interested me. And National Review is just, one of the preeminent places if you're a conservative to get into journalism. So I applied to they have kind of a post-grad fellowship program for recent college graduates. So I applied to that my senior year and ended up being accepted. And the way it works is if you like it, you do well, they like you, you can stay on for a second year of the fellowship. And then after that, I was hired as a staff writer. So I was there for 6 years full time. And now I still write for them pretty frequently, but it's no longer my full-time job. But in any event, it kind of many roads in my life kind of led me there. And I feel very blessed to have started my career there.
Is if you were to say, are you scattered, again, not trying, this is again with respect to this pro-life cause, but also the other great work you're doing, are you scattered to many different endeavors right now, or do you have a place you call home that once was National Review, now it's with Ethics Public Policy Center, or are you scattered to a lot of different places?
So my full-time job is as a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Gotcha. And so that means I do a lot of speaking for mostly on college campuses, but different speaking events. And then my book was written shortly before I became a full-time fellow. So that position helped me get the book done. And then other than that, I mostly do freelance writing. So one of the places I write frequently is National Review, just because I'm a contributor there. But I have relationships with a number of really good publications that are willing to print what I have to say. So I do a bit of all that depending on the topic.
Are there other topics outside of the pro-life cause that you find yourself, I mean, I've read a lot of your work, but for our listeners, that you find yourself really drawn into writing about?
In the past, I've focused a lot on education, specifically school choice. I've written a lot about religious freedom and religious liberty in kind of the context of, cake baking and all that, back when that was a little bit more prevalent in the news. And lately I've been thinking through and writing a lot more about not just kind of the post Roe v. Wade, what should our pro-life or abortion policy be, but rather what does it look like to really build a pro-life culture? And so that's where I'm trying to take my work in the next few years, whether through another book project or, longer articles and speaking. Just obviously we have to do more than just have pro-life laws. That's not going to cut it. We're living in a country that really does, unfortunately, many people think abortion should be legal for one reason or another. And we don't change that just by kind of top down having really strict laws about it, although that's part of our effort. We really have to reshape culture. And so that's really where my work is headed, I hope.
What's your sense, and this may be a teaser on the book that you may be writing, how does one change that culture?
Well, that's the $1 million question. And that's why I'm starting to think we better talk about it. Because, I mean, if you look at, if you're kind of plugged in on this issue and you follow it, I think a lot of what pro-lifers have been saying for the last 2 years is, at the end of the day, it really is about culture, and we have to have good laws and policies, and law is a teacher, right? So law matters. It shapes our culture. But, the whole ball game is reshaping culture, but no one seems to be telling anybody else how we're going to get that done. It's not an easy thing, and no one has a quick fix. And so I think really, kind of like I said, how we're all called to do something about the reality of abortion. Now it's becoming more, we all are called to do something about building a pro-life culture. And so big pieces of that would be, what does your church do to support women in need? What does your church do for families and couples with kids, right? Do you have some kind of babysitting program so married couples can go out on a date? Or there's so much more to it than just reaching people who are contemplating abortion. It's really a culture that values children and families again. And I think there's a lot of good thinking going on about this, but it's not necessarily intersecting with pro-life efforts at the moment.
It's funny because the first thing you said was kind of going back to speaking about church, as I said, well, how do you reframe this culture? Do you subscribe to it's obviously overly simplified, but do you subscribe to the notion that politics is downstream from culture and culture is downstream from religion? I don't know if it was Christopher Dawson that actually talked about when religions die, civilizations basically go bankrupt, so to speak. What's your sense about the way that, we live in this crisis of the nones right now, the NONES, the disaffiliated out there. How much is your sense that a certain amount of this popular assent to the autonomy a person has to have an abortion is a byproduct of a culture that's become decadent in part because of a loss of religious faith?
I think that's 100% it. You've just absolutely hit the nail on the head. I think that's 100% it. I mean, how do you ask people? You mentioned, we opened the segment talking about the fact that pregnancy can be a burden or can be difficult. Well, how do you ask someone who thinks that their life is about them and about being fulfilled all the time and pursuing their own goals and having autonomy? How do you ask them to make that sacrifice and say, not only is this an option, but a requirement? Once this child exists inside you, you actually do have to make that sacrifice, because to do otherwise is morally evil. Well, how do you say that to somebody who doesn't believe in morality, or who doesn't, you know what I mean? We're on totally different wavelengths. And so I think you're 100% right. And this is why I love Word on Fire so much, because we have to bring the reality of Christ back to people who've lost that. And until we do that, I mean, sure, law and policy and a pro-life culture, that's all great, but it comes from this universal fullness of truth that we have in the Catholic Church.
And to your point, I'm hopeful. I really am hopeful, because I think, and I'm going to go back to our, watching Netflix on the couch for a week versus, getting up, showering and shaving, going to work and working out. There is, and that's a very rudimentary thing about structure and order, but there is the God-shaped hole. And I do think that there comes a point where people, they keep serving, they chase after the honor, pleasure, wealth, power, kind of surrogates for God, if you will. And I think they keep coming up short. And more and more, the further decadent our society gets, people dabble with nihilism. And I think when they start looking into the abyss, they draw back. Not everybody, but I think people draw back and they say, I've been down the road of the counterfeits and the surrogates. What is this over here? What is this over here? And so to some extent, my hope is, you don't want people to, I think it was Flannery O'Connor that said, most people come to the church by ways that the church doesn't allow. But to some extent, people find, we sometimes we all can find ourselves broken. As Fulton Sheen would say, you got to break the heart for it, to open it up. Sometimes we find ourselves broken, and in that brokenness is where the resurrection kind of occurs, and so on. So in spite of what we've just talked about the status of things, your interest in this fundamental cultural shift and the way to go about it betrays in the best of ways a hope that you seem to have that we can change the culture. Is that fair to say?
I do think so. I certainly, on my best days at least, would say it's worth trying, even if we're not certain that we're going to succeed. I think we're called to do something about it. And you're 100% right that there's this God-shaped hole that people are hungry for more than what they have. And if they come to us looking for it, what do they find?
Yeah.
I think that's a question we have to be asking ourselves about how we're spending our days. And we talked about, being a bearer of Christ into the world the way Mary was. Those are the people that we're trying to find, right? The people who are hungry. And sometimes those people are in the pew next to us. Sometimes they're us, right? It's not just kind of those lost weirdos over there. Like it is all of us in a way, depending on the day and the circumstance. But I really think that's where we have to start as Catholics and as Christians. Even with something like the fight against abortion, it's ultimately a much bigger battle over the human heart and what we believe about what it is to be a flourishing human being.
Very good. A couple questions left, Alexandra. First, how has Mary's plight as a young, unmarried, pregnant peasant girl in the backwater of empire, how has that role that she had, that status she had, how's that formed your thinking on abortion? Oh,
very much so. And it really struck me at one point early on when I was working on this topic shortly after graduating college that, Mary was the type of mother who would have an abortion today, right? I mean, obviously not Mary herself. You know what I mean? A woman in that situation, that's who we're telling abortion is a solution.
Right.
And yet we have this example of, the ultimate act of charity and freedom and goodness of saying yes to God in that moment, allowed God to redeem the entire human race.
Yeah.
And so how powerful is it when you're in that difficult circumstance? And it's not always, a young, poor mother. There's all kinds of difficult circumstances where you say yes to life anyway. The fruit that God can bring out of that, if you're willing to say yes, I think that's what Mary teaches us in the context of abortion.
Yeah, very well said. I want to ask you, I can't let you go without asking you, what are you reading right now? Or what would you recommend those who are listening to us that they can't miss reading?
Well, I am unfortunately a chronic reader of 12 books at once. So
I'm right there with you. I'm right there with you.
Well, a little bit all over the place, but some books I'm really enjoying right now. I recently got the book Art by Paul Johnson out of the library. I think I might need to buy it because it's a very hefty walk through kind of art history. And what I'm really liking about it is he situates his sort of explanation of art in the context of the historical moment where it emerged. So you learn a lot about world history at the same time that you're learning more about art. So that's one I'm delving into. I've really been enjoying the Summa Domestica. It's these 3 books by, I believe her name is pronounced Lila Lawler. And they're all about kind of homemaking and education of children and reading and housekeeping, all these different things that are really about how to build a good life in the home. So it's not always easy. I'm not the most organized person. So working full time and being at home and working on getting our house in order and all that, it's not always easy, but she has a lot of deep wisdom to offer from her experience as a mother of 7 children on how to keep all that in right order and maintain your sanity. So those are really wonderful. And let's see what else. Lastly, I guess I would just mention a book. I don't even know the exact title of it, but it's by a security guard who worked at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. His name is Patrick Bringley. So you could look up his name and Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And it's kind of in line with the art topic, a lot about sort of his personal experience of being around all some of the most beautiful art in the world and what he learned there.
What's your draw to art? Just always, has it always been kind of a fascination with the beautiful, effectively, or is this what's the impetus for those 2 books at this time?
Well, I kind of just happen upon topics that I feel like I don't know enough about at different times, and then I just delve in and dabble a little bit, and then move on to the next one. So I'm not necessarily the most scholarly reader, but I'm interested in a lot of things. So I'll just go to the library and browse and see what strikes my interest. And that'll usually lead me to something else. And I stay there for a while and then move on. Art, I think it would be, I feel like I don't know how to appreciate it as much as I would like to. And so I'm just trying to remedy that a bit before I hop on to the next thing.
By the way, I want to applaud. So I'm an internal medicine doctor. So I'm a generalist as a physician. I'm not a specialist. And I think my bias is that the generalist worldview is a much, much underrated worldview. And it's in an age of silos and hyper specialization, which sort of sometimes deforms context and deforms understanding of the greater, bigger picture. keeping that generalist mindset. First of all, it's fascinating. It's interesting. There's always something to learn. I mean, it's very Chestertonian. And second of all, this is my bias. I think being a generalist makes you a little bit of a better thinker sometimes. So, God bless God bless the specialists, but the generalists are always pulling things back into context and looking at things in proportion to one another. Would you agree with that? I don't want to get you in trouble by saying that.
No, I love that. I love that you said that, because my husband is very much the read 4 really long, dense books on one topic a year kind of guy. And I'm more like, give me 4 encyclopedias and I'll leaf through all of them by tomorrow. And I always feel kind of, especially as a scholar at a think tank, that's not really what you're supposed to be doing. But I want to know something about everything. It's all so interesting. And both he and I could probably, move a little bit in the other person's direction and benefit. But you've really affirmed my worst tendency. So thank you.
No problem. No, right there with you. Well, let's finish this conversation, Alexandra. It's been a wonderful conversation. But one last question I want to ask you is, how have you personally been changed by the intercessory love of Mary, the Mother of God?
Well, I would say the first answer that comes to mind is the reason we're having this podcast at all, which is that I gave this talk about Mary last summer at the Napa Institute conference and then turned it into an article. And when I was first asked to talk about this, my first thought was, I am the worst possible person to speak about this. I mean, I'm just one of those Catholics who has known that Mary's there and has known I'm supposed to think of her as not an icicle. And yet that's just kind of what she's always been for me. And here I am being asked to, talk to a room of a couple thousand people about how we all need to be inspired by the witness of Mary. And so I kind of used that being put on the spot experience to say, okay, Mary, put your money where your mouth is, right? Are you there? Are you available for a relationship? And if so, you're going to have to make this happen. And that's what happened. And it really changed not only my ability to articulate something that's true, not because of my own power. I think it was really inspiration. But also my real belief in that personal relationship that's available. So,
well, and for those listening, as Alexandra and I were talking before this, I want to bring her back to talk about a number of topics, but maybe it's somewhat providential. Of all the different essays and the book you've written and so on, and the speeches you've given, this is the one that really jumped out at me. And I just, it strikes me as maybe there is a little bit of a calling process for you with respect to sharing about Mary. And you've done a marvelous job in your writing, in your speaking, and also in your sharing of this conversation with us.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I do think it was all the talks and essays I've really had to call on the intercession of Mary or other saints or, pray about a lot, always end up being my best work. So I think there's a big lesson there for all of us, right? It's not about us and what we have to offer.
Alexandra DeSanctis, thinker, writer, and devoted daughter of the Blessed Mother, thank you. It has been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you so much, Todd.
So I've been thinking. I remember standing in front of it, Michelangelo's Pietà. With head covered in wilting cloth and neck tipped slightly forward, with eyes momentarily closed and lips pensively pursed, the Mother of Christ sat in dark silence. Her right hand, with fingers splayed, firmly supported her son's slack torso, while her left hand was open, wayward, almost in supplication, with its palm upturned as if imploring God with the singular question, why? Her son, the 33-year-old Christ, lay dead, dwarfed in his mother's lap, swallowed up in the raging sea of his mother's garments. Michelangelo sculpted Mary as an enormous presence. If both were to suddenly stand up, she would swell to nearly twice Jesus' size. The word Pietà has rightfully come to be associated with Michelangelo's particular masterpiece. To turn a popular phrase on its head, a picture, or more precisely a sculpture, is worth that one word. More broadly, however, the word Pietà has represented any work of art portraying the Virgin Mary cradling the body of her dead son, Jesus Christ. Pietà draws from the Latin word for piety and the Italian word for pity. How apt that this image would indeed be a holy sadness. Others have defined Pietà as calm passion, that is to suffer with, or to endure the passion alongside, quite literally in Mary's case, someone experiencing immense trial. When I first encountered this masterpiece, I was a 30-year-old married Lutheran backpacking through Italy with my wife. We had no children at the time, and though I was well on my way, I was still 6 years away from my Catholic conversion. Standing in St. Peter's Basilica, I found myself lost in the image. The Pietà at that time struck me as an exquisite miracle of sculpting. How Michelangelo could so masterfully capture the folds of cloth, the sturdy shoulders, the grief-struck mother, and the lifeless Christ, I will never fully comprehend. I was hit with a mix of wonder at its majesty and sadness for its subject. It has been 20 years since I was in Rome. I am 50 now, a Catholic and the father of 2 teenage daughters. And every so often, in a picture, a poster, a televised image, I catch a glimpse of the Pietà. And while it is the same masterpiece, for me, it is now entirely different. You see, where once I was saddened by the image of Mary cradling the dead Christ in her arms, now I am crushed by it. Now I can't escape the unbearable empathy that it evokes. How would it feel to cradle my own child in that fashion? And I can't even say what fashion that is, just let's say in that fashion. And it is utterly unbearable. Furthermore, I grieve more because the God who warms me daily, who encourages me, who teaches me, who accompanies me, who counsels me, who guides and redeems me, my Lord, my Father, my friend, my Savior, lies dead at the hands of my sin and my brokenness. But there is one last thing. Mary in the Pietà instructs and encourages me. To be sure, she grieves beyond measure, but she is not inconsolable. I look at her closed eyes, her pursed lips, and her upturned hand, and I'm struck that she still trusts. There is a receptivity in that open hand, a gesture of surrender, a pained but faith-filled assent to the prayer, "Thy will be done." Mary trusts the God of the Annunciation, the God of the Visitation, the God of the Presentation, and only days following the scene of the Pietà, the God of the Resurrection. Mary knows that in the eye of the seething storm of abject misery is the still small voice of a God promising one profound and incontestable truth. You will understand, and it will be okay. The Pietà reminds us that in the midst of incomprehensible pain, there is hope. There is a way. Mary knows. I can see it even in her quietly pained face. She knows. And forever she models that supreme composure with her enduring words spoken at the beginning of her journey. My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior. And one last thing. This week I would like you to pull up an image of Michelangelo's Pietà. As you look upon it, trace every line etched in Mary's face, every gesture found in Mary's hands, every fold falling in Mary's garments, and then contemplate the limp, lifeless body of Christ in her oversized lap. And while doing this, read Mary's Magnificat, found in the Gospel of Luke chapter 1. Notwithstanding the trials Mary would endure in bearing, raising, and accompanying Christ in his passion, she never lost sight of her irreplaceable role in the theodrama. Let us never lose sight of our role in God's unfolding plan, and the sustaining encouragement we can draw from Mary in our own trials. Blessed Mary, untier of knots, pray for us. Thank you once again for joining me on the Evangelization Culture Podcast. I'm Todd Warner, and until we meet again, keep bringing Christ to a hungry culture.